Hello, St. Peter's. Welcome back for library time. It's our chapter book edition. My friends are here excited to find out what happens this week in Muggie Maggie, the story we started last week by the beloved author Beverly Cleary. So they've been hanging out in the library, playing in the sunshine because it's been such a bright, sunny, beautiful day. We have Ralph, Magic Monkey, Daisy's here, and of course our pig of joy with her jar of joy, so we can spread some joy when we're finished reading the story. Do you remember what happened last week? We started the book Muggie Maggie. Right, she was supposed to learn cursive handwriting. All of the third grade students were going to learn how to write cursive, but she decided she wasn't going to do it. She said, nope, I don't want to do it. I'm not learning it. I can print, I can type on my computer. I don't need to learn cursive. Her dad said she had to because it was her job at school. And her mom was like, well, you know, once the other kids start doing it, it'll be fine. Once you start learning, don't worry. She didn't care. She didn't want to do it. In class, instead of doing handwriting, she would just draw big loopy lines, right? Like a roller coaster. Well, her teacher is starting to get a little bit upset with her. So this week we're going to find out maybe if there are some consequences to her deciding that she wasn't going to do what the teacher asked her to do. Are you ready to find out? Me too. We're going to start with chapter 3 because that's where we left off. All right, chapter 3, Muggie Maggie by Beverly Cleary. Maggie began to enjoy cursive time. She experimented with letters leaning over backward and decorated with little circles the way her mother dotted her I's. She wrote messy G's with long straight tails the way her father made his Y's. Why, Maggie, said Mrs. Leeper, I find your cursive very untidy. I'm writing like a grown-up, Maggie explained. The result was Mrs. Leeper's asking Maggie's mother to come for a school conference. Uh-oh. That day, Mrs. Schultz had to fill the gas tank of the car, go to the bank, buy paper for the computer, and take Kisser to the veterinarian for his shot. All this after teaching exercise classes in the morning. She was not smiling when she reached school, still wearing her warm-up suit. She handed Kisser's leash to Maggie so she could take care of him during her conference with Mrs. Leeper. Kisser was so happy to see a playground full of children that he wanted to jump up on everyone. Maggie had to hold on to his leash with both hands when her friends gathered around to ask why Mrs. Schultz was talking to the teacher. So here's a picture of that. You can see Maggie holding her dog's leash and her friends gathering around, because that doesn't happen every day on the playground, does it? Well, Joanne answered for Maggie. Maybe Mrs. Leeper wants her to be room mother or something. I bet, said Kirby on his way to the bus. What did she say? Demanded Maggie when her mother returned and everyone had boarded buses. What did Mrs. Leeper say about me? Down, Kisser. Mrs. Schultz sounded cross. Mrs. Leeper said you are a reluctant cursive writer who has not reached cursive writing readiness, and perhaps you are too immature to write it. Maggie was indignant. I am not, she said. I am gifted and talented. Some people were gifted and talented, and some people weren't. At least, that was what teachers thought. Maybe no one had told Mrs. Leeper how gifted and talented she was. Maggie's mother drove home without saying one single word. That's how you know you're in trouble, right? When your mom won't even say one thing to you. Maggie hugged Kisser, who was so grateful that he licked her face, which she found comforting. Someone loved her. For several days, just for fun, Maggie drew fancy letters at cursive time, and then Mrs. Leeper told her that Mr. Galloway, the principal, wanted to see her in his office. On her way, Maggie, filled with dread, dawdled as long as she felt she could get away with. So that means she took her own sweet time to get to the principal's office. "Hello there, Maggie," said Mr. Galloway. "Sit down and let's have a little talk. Maggie sat. She never enjoyed what grown-ups called a little talk. Mr. Galloway smiled, leaned back in his chair, and placed his fingertips together like an A with his thumbs for the crossbar. So he was sitting like this. Right? A printed A, of course. Maggie, Mrs. Leeper tells me you are not writing cursive. Can you tell me why? Maggie swung her legs and stared at a picture of George Washington on the wall. She nibbled a hangnail. Mr. Galloway waited. There she is. There's the picture of George Washington. She's biting on her fingernail. And he's just waiting. See his hands there? Just like I showed you, right? Finally, Maggie had to say something. I don't want to. I see. Mr. Galloway spoke as if Maggie had said something very important that required serious thought. Lots of it. And why don't you want to? Asked the principal after a long silence, during which Maggie had studied the way he combed his hair over his bald spot. I just don't want to, said Maggie. I use a computer. Mr. Galloway nodded as if he understood. That's all, Maggie, he said. Thank you for coming in. That evening, Mrs. Leeper telephoned Maggie's mother to say that the principal had reported Maggie was not motivated to write cursive. That means you don't want to, Mrs. Schultz explained to Maggie. That's what I told him, said Maggie, who couldn't see what all the fuss was about. Maggie, cried her mother, what are we going to do with you? I'll motivate you, young lady, said Mr. Schultz. No more computer for you. You stay strictly away from it. Mrs. Schultz had more to say. Tomorrow, Maggie is to see the school psychologist. She looked worried. Mr. Schultz looked grim, and Maggie was frightened. The psychologist sounded scary. Kisser understood. He licked Maggie's hand to make her feel better. As it turned out, Maggie loved the psychologist, who talked in a quiet voice and let her play with some toys while he asked gentle questions about her family, her dog, her teachers, nothing important. He asked her about her times tables, and, almost as an afterthought, he inquired, How do you like cursive writing? Okay, answered Maggie, because he was a grown-up. A couple of days later, Maggie's mother said, The school psychologist wrote us a letter. Maggie's feelings were hurt. He had seemed like such a nice man. She had learned to be suspicious of letters from school. This was not the first. Mrs. Schultz continued, He says it will be interesting to see how long it will take you to decide to write cursive. Oh, said Maggie. How long do you think that will be? Asked Mr. Schultz. Maybe forever, said Maggie, beginning to wish she had never started the whole thing. Oh, because now everybody's getting in on it. Chapter 4. Maggie had grown bored with not writing cursive, but by now the whole third grade was interested in her revolt. Each day they watched to see whether she gave in. Her friends talked about it at lunchtime. In the hall, she overheard a fourth grader say, there goes that girl who won't write cursive. Many people thought she was brave. Others thought she was acting dumb. Obviously, Maggie could not back down now. She had to protect her pride. Courtney and Kelly, best friends, who sat opposite one another, did not approve of Maggie. Courtney said, Only first and second graders print. Kelly said, I think you're acting dumb, Maggie. Joanne whispered from the next table, If you are having trouble, maybe I can help you on Saturday. I'm not having trouble, Maggie whispered back. I just don't want to do it. Then she worried. What if others thought gifted and talented Maggie couldn't write cursive if she wanted to? Mrs. Leeper handed out individual papers with each person's name, first and last, written in perfect cursive at the top. Today we practice our signatures, she said, and she looked at Maggie. Even if we write letters on computers, we must sign them in our own handwriting. Maggie studied her neatly written name. If she wrote Maggie Schultz and not one letter more, would this be giving in? Not really, she decided. Not if she wrote like a grown-up. While Kirby, a boy who always did what he was told, more or less, gripped his pencil, pressing down so hard he broke the point and had to go to the pencil sharpener, and Courtney and Kelly wrote with pencils whispering daintily across their papers, Maggie wrote her name the way her father wrote his. So it looks like this. Remember how her father made those straight lines down and he didn't make the loops at the end? So that's the first attempt, her first try. On the next line, she wrote with her left hand, which was difficult. Have you ever tried to write with the hand you don't usually write with? It's not easy. So that's how this one turned out. A little bit messy, right? Because you can't quite control the other hand as well as your dominant hand. Well, Kirby worked so hard that he needed a rest. He pushed the table into Maggie's stomach, and Maggie pushed it back. Mrs. Leeper, said Courtney, Kirby and Maggie are wrecking our cursive. They do it all the time, said Kelly. This brought Mrs. Leeper to their table. See, Mrs. Leeper, said Courtney, pointing. That is where Kirby pushed the table. And this is where Maggie pushed it back, said Kelly. I'm sure they won't do it again. Mrs. Leeper tried to look happy as she paused beside Maggie. Maggie quickly curved her arm around her paper and bowed her head as if she was working very, very hard. She didn't want her to see it. Mrs. Leeper, who often told the class she had eyes in the back of her head, had already seen Maggie's work, if one could really call it work. Maggie, why are you writing with your left hand when you are right-handed? She wanted to know. That's the way my mother writes, explained Maggie. Mrs. Leeper removed the pencil from Maggie's left hand and placed it in her right. And where are the loops on your G's that we talked about? Your L and T are leaning over backward. We don't want our telephone poles to tip over, do we? I guess not. Take your paper home and do it over, said Mrs. Leeper, and we must close our A. Your name is not Muggie. Uh-oh. So here's Maggie in class with the teacher. And now, so here's, let's look closer. Here's Maggie. She has a scowl on her face because Kirby just pushed the table on her. And here's Courtney getting ready to tell on them. All right. Your name is not Muggie. Maggie knew she was done for. Muggie Maggie, whispered Kirby as Maggie had expected. Oh, you keep quiet. Maggie pushed the table into his stomach. Mrs. Leeper, called Courtney and Kelly at the same time. Oh, I thought we were going to have a happy teacher today, said Mrs. Leeper. Let's be good citizens. Maggie was sure she would not have a happy recess, and she did not. Everyone shouted, Muggie Maggie, Muggie Maggie. Kirby started it, of course. He was not a good citizen. That's a hard nickname to have, isn't it? All right, we're going to read one more chapter, chapter 5. Later that week, Mr. Schultz brought Maggie a present from Ms. Madden, a ballpoint pen that wrote in either red or blue ink. Just what I've always wanted. Maggie was filled with love for Ms. Madden, the one grown-up who Maggie felt did not pick on her. Can I thank her on the computer? Asked Maggie, testing her father. You may not. The computer is off limits. Mr. Schultz was annoyingly cheerful. Use your new pen. Maggie was not surprised. Her father always meant what he said. She went to her room and, with Kisser resting his nose on her foot, went to work. Her printing was not as neat as it once had been because she was out of practice. She wrote one letter in blue and the next in red, over and over. Dear Ms. Madden, thank you for the pen. I like it. Love, Maggie. So here's a picture of Maggie and her father with another scowl because he said she couldn't use the computer. And this is the note she wrote. That is pretty cool, right? She switched every other color, but she printed it. She didn't write it in cursive. After a moment's thought, she added, sorry, so sloggy. But look at how she wrote it this time. So the big S starts all of these three letters, three words. Sorry, so, sloggy. Do you think she meant to say sloggy? What do you think she meant to say? I agree. I think she meant to say sloppy. There. Maggie, pleased with her work, folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, printed Ms. Madden on the front, and slipped it into her father's briefcase with the virtuous feeling of having done what was expected of her. The next evening, Mr. Schultz brought home an envelope for Maggie, who tore it open. The note, as she had expected, was from Ms. Madden and was neatly typed, except for one consonant. It read, Dear Maggie, if you are really sorry so sloggy, or did you mean sloppy? Why didn't you copy your letter over? Love, Hilda Madden. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. She felt so ashamed. Now even Ms. Madden, along with everyone else, was picking on her. Mrs. Schultz, seeing Maggie's tears, asked to read the note. Then she said gently, Well, Angel Face, why didn't you do your letter over? Maggie sniffed. I thought Ms. Madden would understand. Maggie's father took his turn at reading the embarrassing note. Of course Ms. Madden wouldn't understand, he said. Ms. Madden is a secretary who is always neat and accurate. Well, I don't want to be a secretary, said Maggie, thinking of several neat, accurate girls in the 3rd grade. I'm going to be an astronaut or a meter maid. Good for you, Goldilocks, said her father, and he rumpled her hair. Here's Maggie getting the letter out of the briefcase. So even Ms. Madden, who she always felt was on her side, is trying to coax her into practicing her cursive writing more. Now, she did start a little bit, didn't she? She kind of found herself in an odd spot because by the time she was bored with saying she didn't want to do it, all the kids were expecting her not to. So she didn't want to just automatically start. That's interesting to think about the next time you decide to say, I'm not doing it, right? But she still is only writing her name in class. We need to see what happens to get her to be able to write all of her words in cursive. I like this story. We'll see where it goes next week. What do you say we spread some joy? What about you, Joy? You ready? All right. Let's see how we're going to spread some joy today. We'll mix them up. Remember, if you have any ideas of how we should spread joy, send me an email, leave it in the comments, and I will add it to our jar. Let's see. This one's so easy, and it's going to make someone feel so happy. Tell someone you love them. Huh? How easy is that? You know, sometimes we have really busy days and we're rushing around so much and we have to get to baseball practice and we have to get to school and you got to get your shoes on and get your homework done. There's so many things that we have to pack in a day that oftentimes we forget to tell the people that we love how much we care about them. So When you're finished watching this, as soon as you stop watching it, get up, go tell your mom, your dad, your grandma, your babysitter, whoever is taking care of you, go tell them how much you love them. And watch what kind of a smile comes to their face when they hear you say those words. I bet you'll get a nice big hug. And everyone will feel happy. Your heart will be happy, and their heart will be happy. I love that way to spread joy, don't you? I love you, Joy. I'm going to go spread some love. How about you go do that? Come back next week so you can find out the conclusion of Muggie Maggie. I can't wait to see you then. Until then, boys and girls, don't forget, keep spreading your joy.